Hello and welcome to the stream. Let's go ahead and see what we can get into. We're going to do a little bit of Art Bell. Here we go. From the high desert and the great American Southwest, how did you all? Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world's 25 time zones. Each and every one covered like a warm blanket by this program's midnight in desert. I will be Art Bell. And it was my pleasure to be here tonight. I've got a lot to talk to you about, and that's how scared the hell out of you. And probably myself. This is a story I had never heard. It's probably a story you've never heard. So that's all coming up. Rules of the program. No bad language. Well, no really bad language. People call me out. Every now and then I'll see hell damn, right? Or something. And so I'm not banning those, but you know what I mean, right? No really bad language. And allow it. One call for show. Now I have to define it, right? The Supreme Court says you know it when you hear it. All right, I have news on Abby. Otherwise known as KIC 8462852. I think we're going to call her Abby, though. Seems like a good name to me. She discovered the star, right? All right, so here's the thing. I have information again. I've had it now twice from NASA. Once NASA itself, once JPL, twice from NASA. And now I have somebody inside the main scientific circles that are looking at all this right now. And I'm not going to burn this person's name. I understand that makes you perhaps down a little bit what you're about to hear. But artbell.com immediately come because I'm going to ask you to look at a chart, and I almost never ever do stuff like that. But this is important. Go to artbell.com, and right below tonight's guest info, you will find the chart. This is the chart. What this shows is the beginning of Abby. It's no minor matter, and the information I'm about to give you does come from inside the main scientists looking at this. And that's all I can say. You're just going to have to trust, and I do, that the information is accurate. The first 16% penny event was a weird one. The light curve would suggest that the object is monolithic and triangular shaped. But this fact is what's driving all the scientific interest because that is exactly the kind of structure that you would build to announce your presence to the universe. You don't see big opaque triangles in nature. It doesn't happen. If the spectra show the object to be opaque when it comes back around, then it can only be explained as an alien megastructure that was probably constructed to announce the presence of the civilization. That would imply that they wish to make contact. There is a slim chance it could well be conglomerated comet tails. Very slim. A few can appear triangular. However, as you'll see in graph C, and that's what I'm going through right now, graph C of slate length below, well, I guess, which is a close up to the 800 event, what they call the 800 event. That's the big thing, right? Notice how smooth the curve is. As time goes on, it exponentially drops more and more light, and it abruptly drops off. That indicates that a perfect isosceles triangle passed in front of the star. This is hot stuff I'm doing this morning. The Hubble Space Telescope is now on standby to look at KI Abby. We'll call her Abby. The moment a dimming event is detected, the first second they detect any dimming, Hubble is ready to go. They'll use the SGIS instrument to look at the spectrum of whatever the object is and get this. They may even get an image of it as they did with the exoplanet orbiting Oumuamua. The triangle feature is being referred to as, in quotes here, the Imperial Star Destroyer, informally for informally for fun among scientists because it is a huge, slow-moving triangle. So now, using that phrase, some of the scientists will know that I have a name, but I'm not going to burn my sources. Imperial Star Destroyer. Not bad. This is big news. You don't find triangles in your folks. If that's what she means, then we're looking at a signal to us. They want to make contact. It'll leave.
And something happened and she wasn't sacrificed. But he still believes she was. This is what the demon wrote to me. So he still believed that she belonged to him and he came to collect her.
Wow. So, Lee came to collect her. I thought Lee was her husband.
No, Lee is my mother-in-law.
Your mother-in-law.
My husband's mother.
I'll get it all straight.
It's a complicated story.
All right. So that Lee, the mother-in-law, was human. Yes, he was like, that was almost like a person.
I guess so, yeah.
In other words, don't take me, but you can take somebody in a lifetime or two or three, whatever. Somebody down the line in my league.
Right, from what I understand, to her, he gave the impression that it was her. That, you know, she was treating his life with hers.
Yeah. That would make sense. But one would imagine there was a deal cut. In other words, don't take me, take somebody from my lineage somewhere down the line.
I don't know.
No, I don't know is a good answer. I don't know.
You know, there's so many things about this to this day that I still don't know.
I'm glad you're saying it. I know. Listen, I'm really worried when somebody comes on the show with me, Kevin, and I give an answer to everything I ask. When I hear somebody finally say, I don't know, I love it. Because credibility is a story. You know, usually you ask, you push hard enough and somebody's, well, the tenant told me one night when I had a deep sleep, you know, or something like that. And then we'll say, try to provide an answer to every single question you ask. And as an interviewer, I've learned that's stand by, Eddie. And we'll get this, of course, is midnight in the desert. Right now, I'm hearing voices in my head. Did any of you hear what I just heard? Did you? Anybody out there? When I smile on your face, please go to 01952. If you're live, click to somebody. That's 1952. You should always be smiling. Actually, Mike in Virginia said, I'm planning on doing a prediction show this year. What is Mike? It's a tradition that has been losing our account for this last year's predictions to take months out. So it'll be a very positive show, looking ahead only. Maybe 2 days, I don't know. And then you may have heard my remark prior to the break, but I was hearing voices in my head. David Jensen was hearing voices, and I called He operates in the border down there in Arizona. And I said, Keith, I'm hearing voices. Now, either they heard it on the air and they told me, or you did it there. He said, oh, not me. And then someone passes, he said, oh, I left the mic on. And I tell you, there's nothing more demonic than the rolling voice in your ear. Demonic indeed. And since I'm on the subject of the wormhole and messages you can send, if you are a time traveler, you get to pick. By the way, we've got between 75 and somewhere like 80 shows now in the hopper. You go back and you can listen to old shows. You can hear last night's show in the afternoon when you want to hear it, and you have access to the wormhole. Send me messages about how I screw up and so much more. All right, that's it. Yes, Owen's voice is demonic indeed. Debbie, welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, so I would assume that long ago, your children were about what age when this began?
When this began with my one son had just been born, 1987, and then the other two were born in 1990. So until this came out in 2014, they knew nothing about it. We had never spoken about it in the house. So I had to tell them about it before I even wrote a book about it.
Okay. And here we go. We're now going to begin to get about it, what really happened. This is so well documented, all of this. I know that, for example, somebody I trust implicitly was there with you, Dr. Evelyn Maglini, who helped you out, I guess, substantially. You took it from that point.
Dr. Evelyn Maglini was awesome. She was a wonderful lady. I mean, when she came to the house, I mean, she came in with such courage and such confidence. I looked at her, I thought, what would say this lady's going to say this?
Everybody could. To be one. The Warrens also involved.
And Warren came. Yeah.
But I guess someone had a meeting go down a bit more.
She couldn't get rid of it. She tried. No. And the entity hated Dr. Polini.
I can imagine.
He absolutely hated Dr. Polini. He every minute was writing nasty things about her, vulgar things about her in the mirror. But she told us, she said, I can't get rid of it. She said, it's too powerful. It's ancient, it's old, and I can't get rid of it.
That's one hell of a statement.
I know it. I thought she'd be the one. But she said, she was actually worried for my mother-in-law's life. She said, I can suggest something to do. Whether you do it or not, it's up to you. She said, this deity, she called it an ancient deity, or she never really called it a demon. She called it more of a deity. She said, if you take one room upstairs and empty it, and give it the room and pay homage to this won't hurt you, and it'll actually make your life better. She said, because I can't get rid of it, and I don't know if your mother-in-law can be saved. So that's what she suggested.
Wow. Okay. Let us now go back to the very first thing. And you're still in the same house, right?
No, it started at a different house.
Oh, yeah, all right. So at this different house, located where?
Where it very first started, it's in Rancho Cucamonga on Archibald and Narrow Freeway. The highway, excuse me.
I always thought there was something wrong with Rancho Cucamonga.
And this one, there were like 3 houses right on the corner, right there. And my mother-in-law and father-in-law owned the one in the middle. Her mother owned the one next to it, and my husband owned the one on the other side. Well, the 3 houses were all connected.
Was it limited to that house, by the way?
No, it went, all 3 houses were affected.
Oh, my goodness. All right, start with the first thing that ever happened.
Now, I can say the first thing that happened that I can confirm because I actually saw it. If it happened earlier, I never saw it, so it's only hearsay. What I actually witnessed, the first thing was a porch. Um, we had a tenant that moved into, my husband rented his house out, we lived with his mother and father. He had a heart condition and he just felt closer, felt safer living together, so we all lived together. We rented out his house to a gentleman. He had a large storage collection, my husband. So we left one room in the house locked. And the gentleman had free run of the house, but he couldn't touch this room. We would go down periodically to check on the room. The very first thing that happened is we walked into we unlocked the door where the porch were, and something had taken all the bobbleheads, baseball bobbleheads off the wall and put them into the shape of a triangle on the floor. And of course,
And this is locked all the time, is that right?
this is locked with the ones with key. But you automatically think, you don't think something's happening, you automatically thought the tenant did it.
Well, that's just bad, I mean, then you think that's somebody you can't trust.
Right, at least you can see that person, and you can deal with it.
True.
We confronted him, he said, I've never been in that room, I never touch it.
I have a room like that in my house. There's nothing but very expensive, very complicated radios inside, and so nobody goes in there.
Right, that's what Bill talked about, the sports collection.
I fully understand. And so there are some bobbleheads on the floor in a triangle.
Right, we locked it back up, like I said, talked to the tenant. He assured us he didn't touch it, well, what could we say? We thought he did, but we said, well, don't do it again. Within a week's time, my mother-in-law was very religious. Next to her bed, she had a stand with all types of religious statues on it. One morning she wakes up and on the statue of Jesus is a pair of men's briefs. Out of nowhere. She thought one of us was playing a joke, you know, what are you doing? None of us could figure out how it got there. At that time, none of us even understood what a report was.
Well, look, you and I don't know what it is.
It's something that moves, something like an object that moves without anyone physically moving it.
Right, okay, well, here's what I think. There's almost nobody, regardless of their religion, who would do something like that. I mean, it's just so highly disrespectful. I can't imagine, of course, I don't understand, but I can't imagine anybody would hang some underwear on a cross. No way.
No, she was very upset, and it progressed from there. Pretty soon we started getting all kinds of different clothing on her statues, and we couldn't figure out where they were coming from. Then we started getting mail and receipts, and they were all coming from the tenant. They were coming from the house next door.
Receipts, you mean the buying stuff?
Sure, he would like a receipt where he bought some clothes and he had a receipt for them. And they'd end up on her check by her religious answers.
So it started all around religious artifacts.
Right. We went down to the house. It's very hard to explain to the man, listen, we have your things up at our house. You know, you can't do that. He thinks we took the things from his house.
Was that his underwear?
Yes.
Oh, Lord,
I don't know for sure.
At the beginning of that, I would, as a woman, I never guess in the world. If a man's underwear shows up on the frontal line, that would be right. Well, sure. At this point, they're probably, I don't know what you're thinking. They're thinking somebody broke in.
Wait, that was another theory my mother-in-law thought. Maybe somebody came in when we weren't here. Because, you know, you don't go to the supernatural, you go to reality. We try to justify it.
Of course.
But we couldn't. There was just nothing that we just didn't know what was going on. Went back down to the house like a couple weeks later, and he wasn't home. And we noticed over all the light fixtures, where we put the lights on and off, someone had made strange symbols. And it looked like they were drawn in freedom.
Well, then you did have children, of course.
No. My children, my one son was only like a month old.
Oh, okay.
That was it.
I don't imagine him slithering out of his,
And this child was all alone.
Gotcha.
So then within a few weeks, the gentleman said, I'm leaving.
Well,
What was the reason why? He just said, I'm going with him. He told us that on Friday, and by Sunday he was gone.
okay, so I would guess that he was experiencing things over there, or tired of getting accused of doing things over there.
Right, that's what I think too. He wouldn't talk about anything, he just left, so he was gone. When he left, up to the house to look at it to see what needed to be cleaned to re-rent it. My husband goes in his room, I stood in the living room looking around, seeing what needed to be cleaned. There was a long shelf on the top of the wall, ran the whole length of the living room, with all kinds of knickknacks. I looked at it, and then I looked back, and I looked again at it within like a blink of an eye. Every single thing on that shelf was turned backward. Within a blink of an eye. When my husband came out, I said, you're not going to believe this. And he didn't. He said, no, you didn't see it right to begin with. They were all turned backwards. Maybe this man had problems. He did these weird things. So just let it go. So I knew, though, what I saw.
Right, that's right, I understand. And well, what you see, and what you see is what you saw.
Right.
So what's that?
They planned to come back the next day to start cleaning. He gets the place pretty good, but he needed to be cleaned. We came in, we walked in the door. In the middle of the living room was a lamp from the bedroom sitting in the middle of the floor. And I just looked, and my husband said, oh, somebody must have came in the house. He wouldn't want to believe. He was so afraid of the paranormal. He wouldn't want to believe something paranormal was happening. So he would try to make excuses for what was happening.
Most normal people would.
Yeah. So we put that lamp back. We went into the kitchen. We went in the kitchen probably for 2 minutes. Came back into the living room, and the furniture from the dining room was stacked up in the living room. Within 2 minutes, and didn't hear a thing.
Okay, I don't know what you were thinking, and I wonder what your husband was thinking.
Two completely opposite things. I looked at it as something, at the time, I wasn't familiar with anything paranormal. I had never been threatened in my life by it. I looked at this as something absolutely fascinating. Look what was happening. It was like my mind was going in circles trying to figure out what was going on. My husband's first instinct was, let's get out of here. Let's go. Let's get out. But I wanted to try to understand what was going on.
You and I we have different ideas of what's interesting. And by that I mean, for example, the star out there that could be aliens. That's interesting. A room full of furniture, moving itself, I run like hell.
My husband also.
Feel free to keep
it was like, I just couldn't understand it, and it was fascinating to me. I put the furniture back, he left. He stood outside the door, he didn't want to be in the house. But, you know, the feeling in the house, there was nothing nasty feeling in the house, you know what I mean? The house didn't feel like an evil presence or something threatening. It was like, and it became almost like a game. When I'd go up there to clean, I would go into a room and I'd say, if there's something here, move something. I was cleaning, and I'd come back and something would be moved. So it almost became like this game where, you know, it gets you, like it grabs you, look what I can do.
Debbie, a game is Candy Crush. What you're describing is no game, but I guess you were playing.
Really, because to me, it wasn't frightening. It was amazing at that time.
Okay, I've got to give you props for skills fine that I don't have. I'd have been so out of there like your husband, boy. So this went on how long?
Now this went on probably for another week, and then everything just stopped. It just stopped. It was like nothing happened. We went back to the house, nothing was moving. Everything just went right back to normal.
Okay.
So the next month we decided, oh, everything's back to normal now. Maybe this gentleman, you know, left something, you know, he dabbled or did something, left something wrong. Everything's gone now, so we're okay. So we decided to re-rent it out.
Right.
Now, during this time, the neighbor on the other side that we rented out, the grandmother's house, had talked to my husband and said, did someone die in this house? Which no one had. And my husband told him no. But he evidently had been playing with a Ouija board. And he said he contacted something out of Ouija board.
Oh, brother.
And he wanted to know if anyone died in the house. My husband said no, didn't want anything more to do with it because he didn't want to even talk about it.
So this neighbor wanted to know if anybody had died because he had been playing with a Ouija board.
And had contacted someone.
Okay. And I presume stuff began to happen to him.
We don't know. He never said a word. But one strange thing that happened, his son, he was like 20, 21 years old, moved in with him. We saw his son. This was a strange thing. We saw his son, my mother-in-law, walk by the house. She was walking her dog. And his son was in the backyard. And he was digging holes and planting trees. But he wasn't planting trees like planting trees. He was planting them upside down.
Okay.
Yeah. So she wasn't going to talk to him. She said when she looked at him, he just stared at her and just stared. And she got frightened and she left him alone. She said she didn't care if he was planting trees upside down. She just left.
I get that.
So things were happening on both sides, and then everything stopped. It was like it just stopped. So we thought, well, okay, everything's okay now.
So did somebody go out there and plant the trees correctly, or did they stand forever looking silly?
No, they died, and they were all taken, just thrown away.
That's it.
Eventually, because within a month or so after that, the tenant died.
Okay.
Monty's name was, he died.
Okay.
And his son moved out, so that house was empty.
Did he die a natural death, might I ask?
He died congestive heart failure, which is funny because it seems like everybody connected with this died of congestive heart failure.
How are you feeling?
I feel fine. My husband died of congestive heart failure. His mother died of congestive heart failure. His father died of congestive heart failure. His uncle that lived in the house next door died of congestive heart failure.
Wow.
So it seems to be something that runs through that. Yeah. So we rented out the house again where the tenant was with the we rented that out again because everything was quiet.
Sure.
And like I said, there was nothing threatening that happened. So I didn't feel frightened in any way. My mother-in-law and my husband, on the other hand, they were still frightened of it.
Did you disclose this new event?
Yes.
You did?
My husband said, this house may be haunted. And they laughed. It was like, back then it was like 1987. It wasn't like today when people are more open-minded and they understand more about what's really happening out there. Back then it was more of a joke. This is a haunted house. So they moved in. It was a younger woman and an older gentleman. They weren't married, but they lived together. The lady was very kind. We lived next door. I would talk periodically with her when I went out in the yard. She was a nice lady. Then I noticed that I didn't see her very much.
Oh.
And then I see her in the front yard, and she looks like someone has beaten her up. And I confronted her. I said, "Are you okay? What happened?" And she told me that since they moved in the house.
Hold it right there. Hold it. That's great. Hold it right there. You've got it right. It's the long one I told you about. What do you think she said? Advisor doesn't screen calls when he trusts you. But remember, the NSA, call the show, please dial 1-952-225-5278. That's 1-952-CALL-ART. I'm wearing my favorite Ross name. Hi, everybody. I'm Mark. This is Midnight in the Desert. I am interviewing Deborah Buffett. I want to give you a warning that what's coming up is going to be really frightening stuff. I hope you're really hard. Take care. Perhaps it's for the kids. So, the first part has been sort of, I don't know, light, kind of scary for me in a way, but not the heavy duty stuff this time. John is Deborah Walton. So the neighbor was there looking Although she'd been told,
Right.
you asked her,
And she said, she told me ever since they moved into the house, that her boyfriend had become hostile. She said she didn't know what had happened to him. I told her, she didn't get away from it. She said, don't worry, I can take care of myself. And that was the last time I ever saw her. Within a week, everything was quiet, but I didn't see Michelle. Another week went by, no Michelle. I saw him out in the front yard. I said, how's Michelle? I haven't seen her in a while. He said Michelle left. I thought Michelle left before she left. I heard about it. Within the month, he moved out. He just said he had to leave, no problem. He just was leaving. We went up there to clean the house, and it was spotless. I mean, it was bleached, it was cleaned. There wasn't a bit of dust anywhere. The only thing missing was a rug. It was like a throw rug, big throw rug.
suspicious. Did anybody check out under the upside down trees?
No, so we decided we just locked it up. We didn't know. By this time, my husband, my father-in-law, myself, and my mother-in-law had decided we were going to sell the properties and move to a new house, a bigger house, and live together. So we were thinking, well, we won't rent anything out anymore. When Monty died, we didn't rent the other house out. When this tenant left, we were going to rent this one out again. After he left, about a week or so, maybe 2 weeks later, someone was knocking at the door. I was in the front yard. I yelled over, he doesn't live there anymore. He asked me, well, do you know where he is? I said, no. He said, did you hear what happened to Michelle? And I said, no, I haven't heard anything about Michelle. He said they found Michelle beaten to death, wrapped in a rug in a landfill. Now, I was in shock because I didn't know if this, first of all, I didn't know if it was true. I hadn't heard anything about it on the news or in the newspapers. It was just what the gentleman was telling me. And also I remember her saying how the gentleman, her boyfriend changed when he moved into the house. So I remember going home and telling everybody in the house what had happened. Do you think we should call the police and explain, what happened? And now they said, we don't even know if this really happened. How do we know this now? This man was even telling us the truth. So I don't know that it actually happened to Michelle or it didn't. That's just what the gentleman told me. But to me, that was rather scary because at that point, it changed from something that was non-threatening to something that maybe was very evil.
Maybe. But it would have been possible, Debbie, to go to either the police or a local newspaper and find out if, after all, somebody found, I think, in Lansville on the road, dead. That's going to be a story.
That's what he said, about the same thing. But like I talked to my husband was a vet. He read every newspaper, watched all the news. He said he hadn't heard a thing about it. So I don't know if that was true or if that wasn't true. And
pretty weird comment to make either way.
Right. It just a lot of, it made me question at that point of what that thing could do if it was real.
Right, okay. You could even at this stage, even today, you could go back and find out if such thing happened, I'm sure.
Yeah, you know what? That would be interesting to do to find out because Michelle was a nice lady.
It's not a light comment you just drop on somebody. I mean, he must have had some knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, where would it come out of the blue? I mean, there had to be some fact. Stories always have based on some fact.
Or made up. Why would somebody make up a comment like that? Good God.
Yeah.
Found dead, wrapped in a rug. Okay. All right. Continue.
So we left both houses empty. We found a new place to live. It was like 10 miles up the hill from where we lived. And so we were moving very slowly. They put the property on the market, and we were moving our possessions very slowly up into the new house. The very last day we were there at the house, my mother-in-law and I were alone. And for us, this is when it really became hostile towards us. Everyone was gone. My mother-in-law and I were in the back bedroom. We were getting the last of her things, and there was one box. And all of a sudden from the kitchen, we hear almost like an explosion. We went to the kitchen, and the entity or whatever would have happened, all the cupboards had been just ripped off the walls.
The walls?
Off the walls. There are pieces of them lying all over the cupboard, all over the floor in the kitchen.
Oh, Terry.
Yeah, then we hear glass breaking. We go back into the bedroom to see what happened, and it blew out all the windows in the back bedroom.
Oh, God.
And I remember grabbing my mother-in-law by the arm, and we just ran out of the house and got in the car.
And did what? I mean, in the car, sure, for a while, shocked, shaking, probably.
My mother-in-law was shaking. She was so frightened.
That I get.
We went back home. When we were up at the new house, and thank God for a small time, everything was quiet. Nothing happened. It was like we found our safe haven. We were okay. At least that's what we thought. But it didn't turn out that way. We were here for like 3 weeks, and then a thing that anybody else would experience that would just ignore it happened. A picture was turned backwards. And it was like a bell went off in my head. It was like,
here we go again.
It was with us. So it came with us from death. We thought we got rid of it by moving, but it didn't. It came with us.
Yeah, okay, so here we go again. So it wasn't the house, it was you, or it was your mother-in-law.
It was my mother-in-law. Now, by this time, my husband and I, were trying to talk, my mother-in-law, she was the one that was against telling anybody what was going on, or trying to find somebody to help us. Because she said people will think we're crazy, or she had it in her head, if things like this happen to us, we must be evil and we're getting punished for something. We couldn't make her understand, this is something's happening, we need help. So from this point on, we became very isolated. We started to look for help, but we became isolated. We weren't allowed to talk to anybody about what was going on.
What do you mean? What do you mean you weren't allowed?
My mother-in-law would go into hysterics. She wouldn't want anybody to know what was happening to us.
I see, okay.
So we just kind of kept it to ourselves. And then the entity started to isolate us even more. He would go where we went. And he would make it so uncomfortable where we went, we would stop going places. Like we couldn't invite someone to the house, so we would go to visit them at their house.
Yes.
But the entity would do something, like we went to this gentleman's house, it was a friend of my husband and my mother-in-law's, and when we came home, on our kitchen table was the gentleman's wallet. Now, we were just at his house. How can we explain to this gentleman why we have his wallet?
Very carefully.
So it did things like that to make us so uncomfortable that we kind of isolated ourselves from everyone. And by this time, we finally got my mother-in-law to try to allow us to go and try to find help, to tell people what was going on.
What kind of help?
First of all, we went to a psychologist right here in Rancho Cucamonga, because I remember my mother-in-law was contacting the church at the time to try to get a priest to come to the house. And we decided to go to a psychologist to see if any one of us was causing this. So we went to a psychologist.
See, they wouldn't be the ones to really be able to pin this sort of thing down, would they?
Not really, but my mother-in-law said we need to go find out if one of us is causing this. Okay. So we went to the psychologist, explained the whole situation. He was dubious at first. The more we explained to him, the more he started to believe. Finally, he said, I can't help you. He said, you need to go to a parapsychologist, or you need to get in touch with a church or some kind of institution that studies this kind of thing. I can't do anything to help you. So that was the first avenue.
They gave you a full slipping $200 bill.
It was a big bill. My mother-in-law contacted the local church. She had been very religious. She had stopped going to church actually when her mother died. Her mother and her used to go to church together. So when her mother died, she stopped going to church. But she was still a very religious woman. She contacted the church. The priest agreed to come to the house. He came to the house. It was an older gentleman. He walked in the house. He walked into the foyer, and he wouldn't move from there. He was supposed to go through the whole house and bless the house. He said, no, I don't have to. I can do it here. He took out his holy water and he made the sign of the cross in the hallway. And he said, okay, it's left. And my mother-in-law said, aren't you supposed to go to every room and do this? He said, no, this is good enough. I have to leave. So then my mother-in-law decided she would try to explain to him what was going on. And he didn't want to hear it. He looked at me and said, ladies, when they get this age, they get a little crazy. I got to get out of here. And he just ran out of the house and jumped into his car.
So, the way you're telling the story, it sounds like he felt whatever it was, either was lazy or felt whatever it was and said, I'm out of here.
That's what I think it was, because he looked frightened. It wasn't like he was too old to do it. It was just like he just wanted to leave. He wasn't comfortable.
Okay. This is sounding more serious all the time. Okay, so he tossed the holy water, said the words, split. Now, at this point, I'm sure you're hoping that did the trick anyway.
I was very doubtful that just that was going to affect us. But my mother-in-law was crushed because she thought the church would help her. So this really was a blow to her. From about this time, the entity started to focus all its negativity towards my mother-in-law.
Right.
Now, it made my mother-in-law's life hell. It destroyed her clothing. It would take one shoe, so she'd have a pair of shoes, but they'd be from different pairs of shoes. It would take her money, her wallet. It would destroy her credit cards, her license. She couldn't own anything. She couldn't put anything on her purse. It would hide. Her glasses, she had a very bad eyesight. It would take her glasses, so she was constantly having to buy new glasses.
All right, I don't mean to be insensitive, but I've got to ask this. You remember what the priest said, right? Sometimes older ladies, particularly if they're scared or just because they're older, I mean, we all begin to change, right? So, are you confident that mother-in-law was of sane mind and
yes.
Other than being scared, I get it, and
my mother-in-law was an old world Italian lady, as smart as they come.
Okay.
And she was just frightened, but she was sane.
Okay.
And I mean, I would see she'd go to her purse to try to get something, and she'd pull out money and be all cut to pieces. Or she'd pull out her credit card and it'd be sliced in pieces. So it just tormented her. In the new house, it was quite large. She had a bedroom upstairs with my father-in-law, and it had its own bathroom and a sitting room upstairs. We had the master bedroom downstairs, which was a little bit further away from them.
Okay.
And another thing I'd like to do was knives. It would bring knives. Now, these knives weren't our knives. I don't know where the knives came from. He just afforded them. He would stick them through the bottom of chairs, or especially it would be the chair that she would sit in, so that if she sat, she'd sit on a knife.
See, there's a message in that. A fairly clear message. That would, it would be. I get messages. If that started to happen to me, I don't know. I questioned my wife and my daughter. But if I realized that this was happening, from something like this, I don't know what well, actually, I don't know what you can do. You apparently can't move because it follows you.
Right.
You can't stop it because it's not human.
Right. You can't even see it to defend yourself. What do you do?
Yeah.
And it progressively got worse. I mean, she'd go to bed at night and it would put knives in the pillow. So it got to the point where I'd have to be with her, and we'd go wherever. She was going to sit down, we used to have to look before she'd sit so she could sit down safely. The next thing that happened to me was the most amazing thing. All these other things were just torment, but the next thing to me was amazing. It started to write on the mirror with soap.
Okay. What did it?
In her bedroom. In the bathroom of her bedroom.
What is the first thing you saw?
The first thing it said was, I think it was "talk to me."
Yeah.
Yes, and then I remember my father-in-law. When it first happened, she was upstairs alone. So, she called me up here, she said, you have to see this. I left the room, I came back in, and this was on the mirror. Everyone else was downstairs, so it just was her upstairs. So when we all came upstairs to look at it, to see what was going on, immediately the first thing you think of is one of us wrote it. Because I never even heard of ghosts or demons writing on things and actually communicating with you. I never heard of that.
Well, was it her wrote to you, she wrote it, right?
Right, so what we did first, we examined it, and I found out that it was soap. And so we cleaned it. We cleaned the mirror.
Right.
And we walked outside the bathroom. We're the only people in the house. There's only one door to the bathroom. The four of us stood outside the door. And I remember we talked, we said, if we go back in and there's writing, then we know none of us are doing this. We opened the door, we went back in, and there was writing on the mirror. So we knew then, no one else could be in the little bathroom. No one else could get in the bathroom. We were in front of the door. And the four of us were right together.
Okay. All right, so this time, what did it say?
It started saying it didn't want us to go in the attic.
Don't go in the attic.
Right, it didn't want us to go into the attic. It started to pretend, it would write all the time. It pretended to be my mother-in-law's dead sister. My mother-in-law had a nickname when she was a child that only her one sister called her. It was Nene. And the entity wrote on the mirror, Nene, don't go near the attic.
Sound advice, in my opinion.
So it didn't want us in the attic. It would say things, there's a bad wire, there's going to be a fire, stay away from it. It wasn't saying to us, if it was her sister, have someone check out your attic, there's a bad wire in it, I don't want you guys to get hurt. It was saying stay out of the attic. So it didn't want us in the attic.
Well, I'm impressed that there were four of you who, after immediately cleaning this mirror, went back in and then saw it. Okay, so that eliminates any other possibility.
It did. At that point, we knew it wasn't one of us, and no one else could get in there.
All right, so usually, when there's a button and it says, don't press this button, everybody does. They press the button. So it didn't want you to go in the attic. And oh my God, there's a mouse crawling across my table. I'm serious. Excuse me for a moment.
Okay.
I'm going to see if I can. God, what is this mouse doing here? Whatever it's your influence, I'm going to see if I can get a picture of this. Hold on. What in the world is a mouse doing in the place?
It's funny because we were infested by rats for 2 weeks.
I'll tell you. Oh no, he's gone. Darn it. All right, where'd you go? I was just set to take a peek. It was just sitting right there. I'm sorry, Debbie. I'm really sorry. You're in the middle of the story, and I'm talking about a mouse. Where did he go? Okay, let's continue with the story, Debbie. I'll keep an eye out for the little guy. It has nothing to do with your story.
I hope so.
Please continue.
So my father-in-law, we stood there, my father-in-law one time asked it what its name was.
Yes.
And it wrote Prince. It wanted to be called Prince.
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 Okay. At this point, apparently, he was, I don't know, getting used to this to the point he could do something like that, ask a question.
In this point, other than that, time that answer that, for the first year, it didn't communicate with us, more so it spoke at us. It wouldn't respond to what we were asking it. It would tell us things it wanted us to do, things we weren't supposed to do. It almost became we were almost like held captive.
Was it like bad things it was telling you? I mean, give me an idea.
It was bad things, but it would say, don't go in the attic, don't do this, don't bring anybody to the house. If my mother-in-law and father-in-law had to go somewhere, if they didn't ask the entity, say they were going to go, they would destroy the car so they couldn't go. It had power. It stopped us from doing some of the things we wanted to do. It would break windshields, break headlights. It was the most, you can't believe the feeling of almost being held captive.
Yeah, this is very serious damage.
It destroyed the house. The entity had a symbol. It was a triangle, and it had a tail coming out the bottom. And it carved the symbol in the walls. It burned them in the walls. It cut pieces, like 4 or 5 foot pieces of rug out in the symbol. It literally destroyed our house. Every day it was putting our house back together.
That's incredible. I mean, how do you go on living with something like that? And I guess at this point you knew it was with you, not just the house. So it wouldn't make any difference.
No, it was with us. I mean, no matter where we went, like I said, we'd go out to dinner, we'd come home, on the kitchen table would be the name tag from the lady that waited on us. One time we went out to dinner and my mother-in-law looked down at her plate and her meat, it had a big, like someone had taken a big bite out of her meat. So where we went, it went.
Well, that sure takes the fun out of a night out.
Yes.
Okay, so there's no way to get rid of this thing. I mean, I wasn't trying with a priest. I don't know.
We tried everything. We called Lloyd Arbach. He was in charge. He had a paranormal organization.
I know him, yes.
Yeah, he sent Chris Chacon out. And I remember Chris Chacon came out and he had, at that time, I've never seen one before, one of those meters, EMF meters or whatever it is.
Yes,
And he went through the house, he checked it with that and everything. And when he was done, he couldn't do anything, he said. I said, well, what is it? What's going on? And he said to me, very, very nice gentleman, he said, there's some things in this world you're never going to understand. And that was all they could do for us. Everyone that came, and we called, there was no one we didn't try. We tried musicians, we tried people that practiced Wiccan. We tried, we went to Thelma Moss. She sent out Carrie Gaynor. She wasn't doing it at the time. He came to try to help us. No one could get rid of it. They would say, we'll pray for you. We get religious people come out, we'll pray for you. But no one can help us.
Okay. I'm lost. I mean, at this point, what does anybody do? You mentioned he had a meter. Did anything register on a meter?
He didn't tell me anything. All he would tell me was, there's some things in this world you're never going to understand.
Yeah, all right. Well, I know Lloyd, so I'll talk to him about it.
Yeah.
But obviously,
Lloyd Arbach, very nice man. He was, very nice man. To try together, we had, like I said, people from all over. We even wrote to people in different countries. In Brazil, there was a gentleman that worked for this thing, so we contacted him. He told us to contact the Warrens. But before we contacted the Warrens, we had other people come out. We had this was the time I saw it show itself, or at least use something to show itself. 2 shamans came out to the house. Very nice people that came out. By this time, the entity had destroyed my mother-in-law's room upstairs to the extent, and it felt so dangerous now. We all moved in together into the master suite downstairs. Yeah, so now downstairs we have, thank goodness it's a really large room, at the sitting room, so we had beds in there, we had beds in the other part, so we all stayed together. At night, we didn't go apart. My mother-in-law very rarely even walked through the house by herself.
Don't blame you a bit. I think any group of people would be so terrorized. Yes, you can do nothing. There is nothing literally you can do. So you try to survive.
Right. That's what you do. You try to survive the best you can. It got to the point where she'd be sitting in a chair. She'd turn next door, and next door would be a knife sticking right next door in the wall. And these weren't our knives. We ended up with a box of knives, a big box of knives that weren't our knives, we just threw away.
Really?
He just imported them here.
So you saved them?
We had them in a box and we threw them away after about a year when the box got full. We just threw them away.
You had a box full of knives?
Yeah, and they weren't our knives. And there were all kinds of knives, old knives, new knives.
So, At this point, you had no idea. Well, you were in discussions with this thing, right? I mean, obviously.
And up to a point we weren't, because in a way, like I said at the beginning, the first year or so, he talked at us. He wouldn't really communicate with us. Later on, he started communicating with me. But at this point, he wasn't. Like, the last thing was like before the spear came. I'll talk to you about the spear. But before the Indians came, the shamans came.
Indians, okay.
Very nice people. They really tried to help us. There were two shamans came, a female and a male, and I went them upstairs. Now, no one was upstairs. The entity took over the upstairs. It became his upstairs. You could feel it. If you would start going up the steps, you get halfway up the steps, and it was like something would just tell you no. And you want to come back down the steps. You just left it alone. So we didn't use the upstairs for like 6 years. So, he went with the two shamans were upstairs. They asked me to come with them. I went with them. They did a ritual. They had, I remember, feathers, and they were putting sage, I think, all through the rooms and chanting. They opened up the door, which is right at the top of the steps. It goes into the attic. They opened up the door, and they would blow the sage in. And as they would blow the sage in, a second later, something would blow it back out.
And their reaction?
Yeah, you could see the smoke go in, you could see something blow it out again.
And their reaction to that?
They said, we have to go into that room.
Okay.
So they went into the attic. I stood right at the doorway so I could be right there seeing what was going on. Now, the attic had a pink insulation around the walls. And he told me he was going to confront this and make it show itself. I stood right there and watched this happen. And something I'll remember to my dying day. As I watched, the pink installation came off the sides of the wall and formed into a gigantic head. It was like a 5-foot head hanging from a rafter. And it was just the head, that was all. And I only saw the side view of it. I didn't see the front. And it had a huge chin and a large nose, and on the side of its head, instead of an ear, it had a circular horn. It started there and made a circle and went up and over the top of its head into a big horn.
How are you taking this, Debbie? Even the unaverage person could not take this kind of stuff happening.
You know, this is the truth. I don't know why, but from the very beginning, I was not frightened of this. It was almost like one of us in the house had to be the strong one. My husband couldn't, he had a bad heart. My father-in-law wasn't a good person. My mother-in-law was weak, and I had a child. Someone had to defend the family, and it was left to me. So I just, that was it.
All right, never mind. Hold on. The head part, that would have been over the top. Way over the top for me. I'm working on it. Midnight in the desert. Tell her all about the mouse in the room. Absolutely unbelievable. What's in the dark? Sonny's in the dark. Hello, Midnight in the Desert at 1 952 call. That's 1 952 225 5278. All right, my guest is Jennifer Munson. She's in a nightmare. Nobody can even contemplate. Only far away from the story. It's off the charts. Totally off the charts, as you can hear. I want to take a second because I didn't want to start before. I'm telling you, you heard me what it had. I just took a picture and I sent it to Keith. Now, it's not a mouse because the mouse is vanished. Gone. Here's the way it came down. And it's just too weird. I mean, on my right, literally, on my right is a Denon CD player, right? And above that, I've got a special Denon machine that plays Keith voice. Okay. The evil Keith on my mind will play Ross's voice, like that, when I hit a button. That's where the mouse was standing. Now that's directly in front of me, right next to me. And this mouse is sitting there, eyes open, looking at me. curious or something. I mean, why would a mouse get that close to a human and then just sit there and stare? I turned to my left to get my camera, and I started to open the camera app, and I turned back around and it was gone. That was freaky. Let me tell you, that was freaky. That mouse I'm going to name Abby. I need to do something to name Abby. God, I wonder where it is. What was weird about it is, A, it was so close to me. B, it couldn't set off Ross's voice. It was just standing there. And C, it was staring at me. I'm telling you. Looked at me in the eyes and looked at me. I know. Too much, right? But it happened, and I had to get it off, I guess. So anyway, I sent a picture to Keith of the equipment I'm talking about. He's going to post it up there, I think. But you can take a look. You'll see how close this is to me. It's right here. I couldn't. Well, if I'd been fast and had guts, I could have grabbed him with my hand. That's how close he was. But the little sucker was staring at me. All right. Gathering back together. It's just weird. It's weird that it happens when I'm getting a story like this from Debbie. Hey, Debbie.
Yes.
I mean, that's almost impossible. There's, mouse. Yeah, they're pretty, they're kind of, timid. Standard this time was, I could have grabbed him with my hand. That's how close he was. And just staring at me. Weird. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to your weirdness. So, this thing is ruining your life. It's ruining your house. Literally destroying your house. It's putting knives hither and yon in places where you might sit. Awful thought. And there's no help to be had, no matter who you see.
We tried everything. And, it got to the point where my mother-in-law was becoming distraught, which you couldn't blame her. She had no life. She couldn't even have all the money to do anything.
Right.
I believe that this entity, whatever it was, and I still to this day don't really know what it was, I don't think it had the power to actually kill her. I think it wanted her to commit suicide. And that was trying to drive her to suicide. Because with the power it had, I can't believe it couldn't just snap her neck if it wanted to.
That's actually a very good point. A very good point. It seemed like it was trying to either scare her to death, or as you point out, have her take her own life.
Right. Now, when they moved down to downstairs with us in the master bedroom, the entity no longer wrote upstairs because no one was up there to see it. It started writing in the bath of the guest bathroom downstairs. So it moved from upstairs to downstairs, not living, but writing. So that's where it did all its writing. And it wouldn't write a little bit. It would write morning, noon, and night, constantly writing.
Examples, please, of what it said.
It would just, like I said, at first it would tell us what to do. How it changed was like this. This was after like 2 years of going through this constant terror, especially with my mother-in-law. And it got to the point it was just too much. Then something happened. The entity locked her in the pantry. She got up to get some paper towels and locked her in the pantry. And it did grab her by the throat and throttled her. Now, like I said, with its strength and its power, it could have killed her if it wanted to, but it didn't. But it did leave marks on her throat. At that time, it just got to the point where I felt so helpless. What can you do? I was trying to protect her the best I could, but how can you fight at something you can't see? So I went into the mirror at this time. I was very angry with the entity. And I confronted it, and I told it, I said, listen, I'm going to treat you with respect. You'll treat me with respect. You're not to touch my child, my husband, or my mother-in-law, Lee. And I left the bathroom to see what it was going to say. A minute later, I walked back in and I wrote on the mirror, I will not touch the child. I will not touch your husband. But Lee belongs to me. That's what it told me when I asked it why. That's when it wrote the story of what happened in the past and why she belonged to him.
Well, wait a minute. It wrote the whole story?
Yes, it took a couple of hours. I would go in, he'd write on the mirror, I'd erase it, I'd go back out, come back in. He told the whole story.
Debbie, I don't get how you held up through this.
You know what? It's because I didn't have a choice.
Well,
What did I
okay,
do?
yeah, I do get that. I guess I get that. But when I say held up, I meant psychologically held up. How did you not go bonkers?
Because I was so worried about everybody else and making sure they were safe and trying to appease the entity at the same time. Because I found out from that time on, that's when I started calling the entity Mr. Entity. I wouldn't call it Prince because I wouldn't give it that power over me to call it Prince because that's what I wanted. So I couldn't call it Entity. So I just called it, I told it I treat it with respect. It sounds silly, but I started calling it Mr. Entity. From that time on, I referred to him as Mr. Entity, and he would call me Debbie. And from that time on, instead of talking at us, he started to actually communicate with me. He would write to me on the mirror.
Did you get any photographs of all this?
This is funny. When it first started, we had one researcher come and he would say, now take pictures of everything that happens and document everything so that you can show the next researcher or you can show me what's happening. So we would. And we'd write on the mirror, we write it in a book, and we try to take pictures. Now, some of the pictures aren't great because you have to remember back at that time, it wasn't the digital camera where you could see if you took a good picture. And taking pictures of the mirror, you got a lot of glare.
Right, I get that, but you did.
Okay.
You did take pictures.
During this whole 6-year period, we must have taken 1,000 pictures. Right? But this is what happened. The next researcher that would come would say to us, now, you got to get rid of all these pictures. You got to get rid of all this documentation because you're keeping it here. You're acknowledging it and you're making it stay. So throw all this away. So it was a constant taking pictures, throwing them away, taking pictures, throwing them away. So luckily, my husband, who was a hoarder, he would not throw them all away. He had a box which I didn't know about until he died. He would take some of the pictures and he'd throw them all the time in the box. So I have over 200 pictures, 250 pictures of the demon writing and the things that happened with the negatives. So I have a box full of those, but they're not all the pictures because we threw most of them away.
Yeah, but it would be enough.
Yeah.
It would be enough.
In the book, The Unwelcome. That's why I actually wrote the second book. Because the second book, actually, I just wanted to show people the pictures. There's over 100 pictures in that book of what went on. And that's what's so fascinating. Even me, who went through it, see, for 25 years we hid it because once it left, we decided we're not going to talk about it because people said, well, don't talk about it because you'll bring it back. So we didn't want it to come back. So we never, for 25 years, we made a vow. We never spoke to a person about it. No one ever knew anything about it. Even my kids didn't know about it.
You said, you indicated that something strange happened. Well, your husband died?
My husband died, and I was cleaning out the closet, and I found a box in the back of the closet. And I opened it up, and it was full of the pictures of the demon.
Okay, and those are in your book?
Yeah, just 100 of them. I have 100 more.
You have 100 pictures in the book. That's pretty darn good, I'd say. Yeah,
I wanted people to see it. I wanted people to realize that, this happened. Look what it did. Look how it communicated.
Okay, your books are A Deadly Haunting and Unwelcome.
The Deadly Haunting is a fiction version. It's based on the true story, but it's more fictionalized. But 95% of it's accurate.
Okay.
I wrote Unwelcome because I wanted everything to be the truth. I wanted people to know just what happened. And I wanted to show the pictures.
All right. Now, you indicate that something happened involving animals. What was that?
Oh, this is very sad for me to talk about because the entity killed our animals. When we left the first houses down on the other street, we left our dog down there the last night. We were going to pick him up in the morning because we had no place to put him. And we had wrought iron gates. And the entity took the dog and he actually pulled the dog, a pit bull, big heavy pit bull. It actually pulled it through one of the 34-inch wrought iron.
Oh my God.
So half the dog was on one side and half was on the other.
Oh my God.
And I could cry when I even think about it, then why we left that dog there. I remember saying, please, let's take him. No, he'll be okay one night. We'll pick him up tomorrow. And he wasn't. It's so sad. It was just.
I right, you did contact Ed and Lorraine Warren, right?
Right, I contacted them, Lorraine Warren.
What did they
They were
do?
very nice people. They came out. This was back in, let's see, 88. I think it was in 89, beginning of 89. It was in February of 89, I think it was. They were very nice people. I contacted them. They said they were coming out to California to have some kind of convention or something with a friend of theirs. I think his name was Chuck Moses from Los Angeles. And so they said they would stop and try and see if they could help us. Ed Warren was, you could sit and talk to him for hours. He was such a very kind, nice man. Lorraine was a little different. She's a little standoffish, a little reserved, but they were both very nice. I remember they came into the house. Now, whenever the entity did something, very few times did you actually ever get to see it. It's like you had to turn your back or blink an eye before it happened. And this is one of the things I actually saw. When Lorraine came into the room, she walked by a toy box, and the toy box slid right up in front of her. So I actually saw that. And that was one of the rare times it did something in front of someone.
Okay, so the Warrens tried, but no luck.
They came, we all sat down. She said, I'm going to walk through the house. She walked through the house. She came back down. She was rather pale. I remember she looked it up and said, this demon is the most powerful, ancient, evil demon I have ever experienced. She said, this is bad. So I remember turning dead and saying, this is bad, Ed. This is really bad. Of course, my mother-in-law almost passed out when she heard this because that really scared her. They told us they didn't have any contacts in California, someone who could come and help us other than them. And so they decided, Ed said he would do a rite of provocation.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
I really don't know either. It's just he kind of confronted the demon. But at the time, I think there was more than one thing in the house. Because you got the feeling there was one strong thing and maybe some other things that weren't quite as powerful. But there was like one main thing that was the main bad one. And I remember they went in and we all sat in a circle. And at the time we had a researcher staying with us. His name was Gary, who was brought to us by a friend who became a good friend of ours, Brian Hurst. He tried to help us. He was a medium in Los Angeles, a quite famous medium. He tried to help us. He wouldn't go into trance in the house because he said it was just too dangerous. But he did try to get people to come and help us. And he brought Gary. Gary was a researcher. He was staying with us. And the entity just hated Gary. He would torment Gary as much as he tormented my mother-in-law. So we sat in the circle, and then Lorraine brought a gentleman, I think his name was Kevin, who videotaped everything. He videotaped it. And we were sitting in the living room, and Ed did prayers, and he did some other kinds of things, and then he called forth the demon. And my father-in-law was sitting right next to me. And I remember my father-in-law started to change. Excuse me. I didn't literally change into a monster, but there was subtle changes. His arm curled up to his chest. His back started to bend forward, so he kind of leaned forward. And he kind of became somebody different than what he was. And he stood up, and he walked towards Ed, and he dragged his one leg, and he went towards Ed. And when Ed saw him coming towards him, he got frightened, and he held up a little piece of wood he had, and he said, this is a holy relic from the cross. You can't harm me. And my father-in-law, in a voice that was completely different than his, but his voice, said, I'm going to bite your hand off and take your hand in that wood and chew it up and spit it in your face. And then all of a sudden, my father-in-law turned around, walked back in the couch, sat down on the couch, and went back to normal.
This is a horror movie.
It is. It's like anything that ever, we had, I don't mention the things like the smells and the pounding and the banging, because they seem so non-consequential compared to the other things that happened.
Right.
But we had all that. We had, like, for 2 weeks, we had, like, rats infesting. They were so bad that in the pantry, you'd open the door, and they'd be hanging upside down, swinging in the pantry.
Really?
We had birds for over a week that would bombard our windows in the bedroom.
I wish you hadn't told the rat story. I'm still looking
We
for
had
that thing.
rats.
Wonderful. Rats hanging upside down.
Hanging upside down, just swinging. And they wouldn't move. move. You go in and you look at them, and they just look at you. I mean, it was like they weren't afraid of you.
Now you're scaring me, Debbie, because you're doing this on purpose, aren't you?
So Mr. Entity, I remember asking Mr. Entity, it got to the point when I would communicate, it got to if I communicated with Mr. Entity, I
Yes.
love to talk. I would go in and talk to him all the time. If I talked to him, he wouldn't be as destructive. It's like he was using his energy to communicate instead of destroy the house.
Now you're serious. Are you really serious about the rats just staring at you?
I swear to you, they just would stare at you. They wouldn't run. They just look at you. And you'd have to back. I remember backing out of the pantry. It was mine. I said, oh my God. And then, my father-in-law said, oh, don't worry. He said, I'll go get rat poison. And Mr. Entity wrote on the mirror, if you get rat poison, not only the rats will get the poison.
Oh my God.
This is what he did. He would threaten us, but then he would back up his threat. He wanted us to bring a gentleman here who had come to the house before, who he said he had known in a past life. And he said if we didn't bring him, something bad would happen. Well, we didn't want to bring this gentleman back to the house. It wasn't the type of person we wanted to bring back to the house.
Yeah.
So he killed another dog. So see, that's what he did. What could we do? How can you fight that? You can't fight something you can't see. There was no one to help us. It was just a matter of surviving. Our life became so bizarre. It was like what was abnormal to someone else would be normal to us. Getting up, looking for knives, pulling knives out of the wall. I mean, we got to the point where we would just do it. It's like it wouldn't threaten us anymore because it became so part of our life.
Well, now you're starting to scare me a little bit. Here I am listening to your story. I'm 70 years old, Debbie, 70. A mouse does not come up 2 feet away from you, and that's how close this mouse was. I took a photograph, by the way, and sent it to Keith, so if you want to see how close it is to me, it's the device that allows me to play Ross Mitchell. This mouse, if he put his foot forward just a hair, would have set off one of those and played Ross Mitchell. Mm-hmm. That's how close it was. But what got to me was a little guy sat there and just stared at me.
Right. It's like they're not afraid of you. It's like they're almost just staring you down.
Well, yes, that's never happened in my 70 years. Debbie, and here you are telling the story tonight, and you get your rats staring at you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're freaking me out a little bit now. When we come back, I want to sort of finish up, and then I want to begin to take some calls. Would you mind doing that?
Oh, sure, man. Enjoy it.
Right. What a night this has been. And if she had not come to the story on the rats, I would have been probably, I'd be feeling a lot better right now. Telling you, never had anything like that happen in my life. They were. She was right. This guy was staring straight at me. And that was going on for 10, 15 seconds. That's how we try to turn around to the camera. I don't see the camera. And the phone. Right? It's like that guy over there. Please coordinate your lunches and call 1-952-225-5276. That's 1-952. Okay. Here's the person who said, well, be in that house, be normal. Yeah, thanks a lot. All right. My guest is Barry Rats, Deborah Lawson. So, if you have questions for her, I don't have any wood. I certainly do. And he said, you can go to my website, not only see a picture of where that mouse was, it's the little device with all the little white buttons. That's what the mouse was. And also, you can see pictures that Deborah took. So for all those reasons, go to the website now and click on a picture of my guest. I will love it. And follow the links. Apparently, it'll take you over to her website or maybe some pictures on my website. I'm not really sure. We're about to go to the phones, and I really do want your help in asking questions. This is a very, very long-term, significant hunting case or demon case. I guess a demon case, right? We'll talk more about that. Anyway, here's the talk. You're welcome to call now at area code 952-225-5278. That's area code 952-225-5278. You can reach us as well on Skype. North America, we are simply MITD 51. Midnight in the Desert 51. MITD, just the letters. It's not case sensitive. You can make it anything you want. MITD 51. If you're outside of North America, it's MITD 55. MITD 55. Once again, here's Debbie. Okay, Debbie, this is such an incredible story in every way I can think of. You then called, and you sort of gave us the story, Dr. Paglini. And a lot of people on this show have a lot of requests, a lot of respect for Dr. Paglini, the late, great Dr. Paglini.
Well, like I said, she was just awesome.
I had her on the show many times. And here's what I'll tell you. I had all kinds of seers on the show, Debbie. I had, all kinds of psychics and people like that. I'm trying to predict the future. Nobody. Nobody even came close to being as accurate as Dr. Debbie. It was bizarre how accurate she was. So she didn't do it. I guess nothing could be nothing could do it, and she would say she couldn't get this thing out, but she felt it.
Right. Well, like I said, when she came with pregnant with her, then she called up later, like within a week's time or so, and she had my father-in-law write things on the mirror for her. And one of the she wrote back to her, and at the bottom of the one thing she had, my father wrote, God protect us. And this entity first saw God and put Prince protect us.
Right, there must have been a way that you finally got rid of this thing. What did you do?
First, let me tell you about this fear, because that is so
that's right, this fear.
amazing. Like, that's something I still have today. One night, my father-in-law jumps out of bed, and he said, oh, like something that touched you. And it was like 3 in the morning. We go over to his bed, and in his bed, he picks up a spearhead. It's about 17 inches long. It's made of iron, some type of metal looks like iron, and it's hand forged. It's really old. And Mr. Entity writes on the mirror that he wants a blood sacrifice.
And provides the spear.
And the spear must be used. He wanted my father-in-law to use the spear on my mother-in-law because he had to have blood for his ritual.
Oh, okay.
So the next thing I took possession of the spear. But I know if I had it, Mr. Entity never touched anything that belonged to me. And for some reason, I think he respected me. He just stayed away from me. If I was with my mother-in-law, he wouldn't harm me. If I was away from her, he harmed her. If I had something that belonged to me, it wasn't touched. I took the spear and I put it away because I knew if I had it, she couldn't have it. We took it to the next day to the Los Angeles Museum, History Museum, to see if we could have it identified. The gentleman there, we got to go in the back with all the tables, and the gentleman came out and told us he looked at it, and he told us it was a spearhead from the Belgian Congo area. It was over 200 years old, and he said it looked like it was brand new. He couldn't understand it because it looked so new, like it was just made. And he said it wasn't for hunting. It wasn't for warfare because of the way it was sharpened, he could tell. He said this was the type of spearhead that's used for, the shamans use for magical ritual. I remember when I came home and I asked his friend to be, where did you get this? He said, I got it from the Congo. But he told us it was a very special implement and that it had to be used for the blood ritual.
This was a very conversational evening.
They talked all the time. Matter of fact, I told her, no, you're not. I actually said, no, you're not getting a blood ritual. I'm not going to let it happen. And it got so upset, it blew out all the windows from the top floor.
Who did all the repairs?
My father-in-law and myself. I mean, we had big tubs of plaster because he used to gouge in the wall. If you look at some of the pictures, you can see he used to just take something and gouge in the wall. That's why I was actually happy when he started writing on the mirror, because when he started writing on the mirror, he stopped gouging everything in the wall. I remember one of the researchers said to him, well, why are you letting him write on the mirror? Just take the soap away. Let him write on the mirror. And then I tried to explain to him, if we take the soap away, he just destroys the house. It's best that he puts it on the mirror, we can wipe it off.
Right.
Okay, so if I communicated with him, he didn't, like I said, he wasn't after my mother-in-law, he wasn't after the house every minute. It was like he used his energy to communicate, and he liked to communicate.
I can see now, for example, the front of your book, Unwelcome, has what looks like a bloody, is that a spear?
That's the spear.
That's the spear. It looks like blood on it. Oh my God, look at this, I can see a bed. Oh my God, a bed standing on end. How does that happen?
He became a little strange. The room is a small room, it's a four-poster bed. Sometimes we'd come in and the bed would be upside down, and you want to take the bed apart to get it, we put it back up, because the bed's too big to turn over in the room.
Yeah.
So it would be upside down.
Upside down is bad enough, but this is like it would have to be balanced to be in this position.
Yeah, it was. So like I said, a few things happened in front of you.
Oh,
Everything happened behind your back.
Yeah.
One of the most, I think, amazing things, even more amazing than the spear and the ports and everything else, is one picture, two pictures I took in the bathroom. Now you have to understand, their bathroom mirrors were bolted onto the wall. They were never taken from the wall until I redecorated in 2013. I would go in and take pictures, and then, we'd look at the pictures. So I was going through the pictures, looking for pictures to put in the wall. And I see one picture, and then I see another picture that was taken, they have dates on them. It was taken right afterwards.
I've seen the dates.
And you look at the picture, and it's not, the reflection is not the bathroom. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes.
You look in the mirror, you see the reflections on
It's a
it.
long time, yes, it's a long time.
It's the kitchen. I can see the kitchen. We had no choice.
Yeah, I'm getting that.
What could we do? We couldn't run away from it. We couldn't get rid of it. No one could help us. We just had to survive.
Right. There came a time, I guess, when you finally got rid of this thing.
Yeah, it left its own free will.
Well, why? I mean, it had an absolute goal, right?
Right, here's what happened. Dr. Bergolini, like I told you, she told us how powerful this was.
Yes.
She said to me, listen, the reason I can't get rid of this is because somebody in the house is giving it permission to stay. And if someone gives it permission to stay in the house, no one can get rid of it. She said, I'm not telling you I can get rid of it even if that person leaves. She said, but we have a better chance. So she said, well, who is it? She said, we'll find out tonight. She said, I'm going to do something. She said, tomorrow you call me and you let me know what happens tomorrow night.
Yes.
Okay, during the middle of the night, I think it was like 3:30 or so, my father-in-law jumps up in bed and he starts coughing, like he can't breathe. Just coughing and coughing and shaking. And we thought we were going to have to call the ambulance because he wouldn't stop. Then, just like it started, he laid back down and right back to sleep, like nothing happened. So the next day I told Dr. Paglini what happened, and she said, he's the one that's giving you permission to stay in the house. And I found out the entity actually wrote to me and explained to me that my father-in-law was not a very nice man. Not a nice man at all. And he had got to the point he was sick of my mother-in-law. And so he was actually encouraging the entity to kill my mother-in-law. So when then he explained this to me, that not only did I have to protect her from the entity, but I had to protect her from her husband. And she was one of these old world Italian ladies who would say to her, "Ma, you gotta get rid of him, he's gotta go, or we can't get rid of the entity." Oh no, it's not him, it's not him. So I was sent to a psychiatrist and everything to try to find out if the hospital we had towards my mother-in-law, nothing helped. Finally, she made him move out. When he moved out, the entity didn't leave, the entity still stayed. But he became more crazy. He liked to talk even more when my father-in-law was gone. Once my father-in-law was gone, and I knew nothing was keeping him in the house, and Gary was still living with us at the time. I remember telling Mr. Entity, you have to go now, Mr. Entity. No one's keeping you here, and you're not going to stay here. Gary, who was a researcher, who was kind of down on his luck, he decided because the entity was so powerful that if he welcomed him into his life, maybe his life would be better. So Gary told me, he said, I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell Mr. Entity he can come with me. I'm leaving. I'm going to England. He can come with me. So I remember I went in and I told Mr. Entity, all right, Mr. Entity, it's time for you to leave now. You have to go. Gary said you can go with him. And the entity wrote on the mirror, I don't want to leave. And then he wrote, I will not work with an inferior being. I will destroy it.